Welcome back to Beyond the Plot podcast. Now, before we get started, a quick note. This conversation was pre-recorded, so you'll hear us talking about some upcoming book events and release plans that may have already taken place by the time you're listening to this. Today, I'm joined by British-born, Sydney-based author Emma Babbington, whose journey to publication is a testament to perseverance. After a successful career as a magazine journalist, Emma spent years honing her craft, writing 5 novels before landing a 2-book publishing deal in her 50s. In this episode, we chat about her transition from journalism to writing psychological thrillers, the inspiration behind the Neighbours and the Gardens, and why family dynamics, community, and hidden secrets are at the heart of her stories. Emma also shares what she learned through years of querying, navigating rejection, researching cult and intentional communities, and finding the resilience to keep writing until the right opportunity came along. Whether you're an aspiring author, a fan of psychological thrillers, or someone who loves hearing the real stories behind publishing success, you're going to enjoy this honest and inspiring conversation. So let's jump in and meet Emma Babbington. Hello, Emma. How are you?
Hi, I'm so good. How are you today, Lisa?
I am very well, very excited to have you on the podcast. So thank you for dedicating time and jumping on with me. Really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. It's so good to be here, especially good because yesterday was my UK and audio and ebook publication day. So I had a little party of 3 with my family last night, but it's nice to be, talking books with someone today.
I love that. And I will ask you about that because I'm very intrigued to kind of, you've got 2 launches, right? The UK and then Australia, and you've got audio as well. So we'll dive into that. But before we get into your story, I would love you to share a little bit about yourself.
Of course. Well, I am a Brit living here in Sydney. I've been here for 20 years. I've always worked as a magazine journalist for like 25 years. I currently work on a women's weekly magazine called Women's Day, which is published here in Australia. And I work on the real life section. And I also look after the book section, which is very handy for my reading habit. I have had 2 books published, The Neighbours last year, and then The Gardens this year, which is coming out in Australia at the end of July. And I've just worked as a journalist for many years. I had a career break after we moved to Australia in 2005. I had little kids then, who are now pretty much grown up. And I took 7 years or so out of the workplace for that. And for the last 5 years have been at Women's Day. And that's
amazing.
Day job and
yes.
life.
You're superstar juggling it all because it's not easy, is it?
I have to say I work part-time. I work 3 days a week. So yes, that makes a huge difference. I have 4 lovely writing days or, other days to play around with. So I think I have the perfect setup because I love going into the office and I love working with my colleagues, and it's a really fun magazine to be on and it's a really interesting job. So yes, it is the best of both worlds. I'm very lucky.
Oh, I love that. So let's take it back then, because obviously journalism, I'm very intrigued as to how that's helped you become a writer. Have you always had a passion for writing? Is it something that started very early on, or did you pick it up a little bit later in life?
Oh, I have this sort of like funny memory of when I was about 5 or 6. I can even picture myself walking up to the front door of the block of flats that we lived in London back then. And suddenly, I don't know, I had this like realization that my name before I got married and changed my name is Wright, Wright. And, and my dad was a writer/editor and my grandpa had been a writer/journalist. And suddenly I remember thinking in my little 5-year-old head, oh, my name is Wright. And my dad's a writer and I will be a writer always. That's what I'll do. And obviously it took a bit more than my just like strange little, kid brain to kind of develop this idea into something. But throughout my whole childhood, I loved writing stories. Reading was everything to me. I lived in a sort of imaginary world the whole time. I just loved writing stories, reading stories. And then as I became, as I grew up, it actually, I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I always knew I wanted to write books. It hadn't actually occurred to me that I could make a living out of becoming a journalist. I don't know why I hadn't figured that one out, because I, at that stage, back in the late 80s, was crazy about magazines and spent my life, with my copies of Smash Hits and Just 17 and all the rest of it, totally obsessed. and then I think finally the penny dropped when I was like about 16, 17. I was like, oh, I could actually write this for a living. But it seemed like such a glamorous amazing world that I just couldn't begin to think how I could possibly get into it. I knew people who were journalists through my parents' friends, but they were always a bit sort of faintly terrifying to me. They were very big personalities. And I don't know, I just didn't see myself as being able to be like a serious news journalist or anything. I went to uni, came out of university. I worked for a bit doing some work in publishing to see if maybe that was something that would fit. And then I got some work experience as a runner on a TV show because I was like, oh, maybe I could write TV shows. Obviously, you don't just write TV shows. Anyway, somehow I found myself finally getting my first job, which was on an extreme sports magazine, which was a very strange choice for someone who was not sporty or extreme or even knew what a skateboard was, I think, at that stage. But anyway, it was a good start because, like all journalists, you have to kind of learn how to write about anything and everything and become an expert in a very quick time frame. So I did that for a little bit, and then I moved on to a TV business magazine. It was so hard. I remember just finding it so impossible to get into journalism at first. I would scan, there was like job ads in The Guardian every Monday at that stage, and I would just scan the pages. There was never any adverts for jobs that I wanted. There was never any like junior jobs. It was all basically who you knew back then. And it just so happened that when I was going to a press event for some TV thing that I was sent to, I bumped into an old friend who was working on The Express at the Saturday magazine there at the time. And The Express back then was very different to what it is now. It was edited by Rosie Boycott, who's a legend in Fleet Street. And I just remember looking at her going, oh my gosh, that's like the dream job. You're working on the Saturday supplement. And oh, I would love that job. And she was like, well, we are looking for a junior at some point. Do you want to do a trial, like do a piece for us and see how it goes? And then they might invite you for an interview. I did the piece. I got an interview. I got the job. And from then on, aged, I think, 25, I was just in love with this whole world of magazines. And yeah, working on a newspaper was so glamorous. I mean, it's the least glamorous place in the world. And especially back then, before like, you know, the internet and all the rest of it was really big, sort of in the late 90s, I think it was. But to me, it just was so enthralling to be amongst these, you know, walking around the news office, and they'd have these old duffers. You'd be sitting there with a ciggy and, you know, a glass of wine after 5:30 when they were allowed to smoke and drink. Piles of newspapers on their desks, you know, like tucking a pencil behind their ear, just looking exactly like all of those stereotypes. So yeah, I did that for a few years and then moved on to women's magazines. And yeah, I just had a ball. And then came to move to Australia and took a real step back and just, you know, didn't really know what I was going to do and took, as I said, a career break, and then eventually got back into it and found myself in weekly magazines. I mean, I'm very aware that I'm probably like one of the last people, apart from my colleagues, who are working in magazines, in print journalism. There's not many of us. And the industry is sadly slipping away, but it is still so much fun. And as you were saying, am I inspired by the work that I do? The job that I have now in particular, because I look after real life and to an extent crime and news. And even though it's a magazine and obviously we're only doing very surface level stories, but you have to be very compelling. We only have like 700 words to tell someone's story. But, you know, we get to interview like everyday people who have the most extraordinary stories to tell, whether it's ones of heartbreak and, you know, tragedy or triumph. I interviewed a woman recently who's just published her first book at 83 years old.
Wow.
So something like that is just so inspiring. So getting to talk to so many different people is probably the best thing about journalism. And it always brings with it so many ideas and little niggly, like jumping off points for writing books. So.
Yeah, I love that. I think just even being in that newsroom, we've all watched those shows, right?
Yeah.
That show you what a newsroom would look like. But I mean, you mentioned that your dad was a writer. Was he a big inspiration to you as well to get into writing?
Well, he worked in non-fiction books. So he worked in those kind of books back in the day. Oh, I mean, everything from like he would write, or he would be the project editor on books about, I don't know, in the 80s, he worked on a book about World War II. And it was one of those books that would sort of be like a really big coffee table book, like really thick, incredibly well researched. You just wouldn't have those kind of books being produced these days. They would take years and years to produce. They sold, you know, hundreds of thousands of copies, I believe. I think they were really, really successful. I knew that I didn't really want to write those kind of things. And I would occasionally go into his office and see what he does. And it didn't really spark much inspiration for me because I wasn't really interested in nonfiction. But I did like the romance of the fact that both of my father and my grandfather had been in that world. And my grandfather, who I didn't know, he died when I was very young. He had been a newspaper editor. I wish I'd known more about him. He was called Eric, and he started off in sports journalism. Wow. Bizarrely, I think apparently in World War II, although my husband and I always think that that's maybe just a cover for some kind of like life as a spy, something much more glamorous. I'm not sure how you can be a sports journalist during the war, but that was always the story I was told.
It's summer, yeah.
And then he moved into working in media relations in the 70s for the Metropolitan Police. So even that has always I think that was not a very happy time for him. I think he didn't like being on the other side. He was very much a newsman. But that has always kind of sparked interest in my imagination of what that would have been like, especially during the 70s in London, which was, I don't know, full of all sorts of things going on. So yes, I always had that sense that, I always had that kind of pride. And it's such a delight now to have both my parents, who are still living a few doors down from me, to just have their lovely, compliments or, to see them being proud of me. But it's especially special to have my dad, because I know how much the printed word means to him and how it just really tickles him that I've kind of followed in his footsteps and have a book published. And 2 books now.
Oh, that's so nice. In terms of the genre that you write in then, because you write psychological thrillers with twists, etc., have you always loved that genre? Do you read a lot and that's kind of why you chose that? Or, I'd love to hear a bit about...
I think I've always... I was just thinking back to when I first... I did write a lot when I was younger, but I wasn't constantly writing mini books like I know some authors do. But I do remember that no matter what, any story that I wrote, the last few lines would take a very dark turn. And I stumbled across a few of them a few years ago when I was cleaning out, some storage boxes. And it was so funny because they all start off quite delightful. I don't know what they're about, but by the end of it, someone's died, a terrible crime's been revealed, or there's a bit of a twist in the tale. And honestly, not much has changed in my style since I was 11, because that's what I still love, a kind of just stories about regular people or mysteries about regular people, but with a kind of a dark side or a slant. I think I don't write a pure psychological thriller. I think it's definitely kind of a thriller mixed with a family mystery. That's really my kind of sweet spot, which I love to read and I love to write. When I was a teenager, I loved reading. I didn't just read dark stories at all. I was very much of the generation that inhaled Jackie Collins and Julie Cooper and all of those kind of books. But I did discover Patricia Highsmith quite early on as a teenager, and The Talented Mr. Ripley and in her series of books. And I just loved that kind of idea of seemingly normal people who are very, very dark, behave quite badly, or I've just always been fascinated by that sort of side of human nature. And then I started reading people like Nikki French and Emily Barr. I don't know if you know her. She's an amazing suspense author who moved into YA, but in the early 2000s, she was writing incredible books sort of with that slant. So they really influenced me. Although I have to say, the first book I ever attempted to write, a proper book I sat down to write and actually finished, because I tried and given up many times before after a few chapters. But the first book I actually finished was a really ill-advised attempt at chick lit. Which was... just basically based on a very glamorous version of me who found herself working as an assistant for a famous actress and then whisked off to the Maldives, I think, or something. And I think there might have been a murder in that as well. I'm not sure. So I think it did take a dark turn, but it got rejected everywhere, and rightly so. I'm sure it was atrocious.
Well, you found your niche now, right? So you've got there. And because you said that you wrote, I made a note here, you wrote your first novel at 30 and then 4 more in your 40s, and then you got a 2-book deal in your 50s. So just tell us a little bit more about that, because that's a journey in itself, right?
It's a really long journey.
Persistence.
Madness.
What did that look like for you, and what made you keep going?
Oh, I have no idea, honestly. I often think about that. I'm like, why did you keep going? You're that stubborn that you're one day. I was so, half of me was I just loved the process of writing and making up stories. But secondly, I was just really determined. I was like, no, I'm going to get to the point where I'm good enough that I can be published. There was this, I think authors, although it's always lovely to write for yourself, you want to find an audience and you want other people to read your work. And I think most of us have this real determination. I don't know where it comes from, just to keep on going until we get there. And so the ill-advised chicklet was when I was 30 and we had taken like a grown-up gap year and we were traveling when we first came to Australia and we're living here for a bit and I was just freelancing. So I wrote that. Then we went back to England for a bit and I had our first daughter. I didn't write or work for quite some time and then we came back to Australia. And I think it was only when my second daughter was about 2 years old that I was, that real itch had come back and I was like, I miss the creativity and I miss doing something that's not just hanging out in a playground. Yeah. And I had a friend who was a childminder and also a very good friend. And I was like, if I pay you to mind Ella, for my youngest, for 3 hours every Thursday, would you look after her and I can just have that time to write? So that's exactly what I would do. And she was like, I would look after her regardless. I was like, no, I kind of need it to be like a thing in the diary because then have it as my time, my kind of carved out time. So I did that for about 6 months or so before she went to preschool. I started writing again and it was just, I would like drop her off at my friend's place around the corner and then race back. I'd be at my desk and I'd have like literally 2 hours and 43 minutes or something to write until I had to go and collect her again. And that was the first book. The first book, I really worked hard on trying to rewrite it and re-edit it. And not that anyone else ever read it, because I didn't really know any other writers at that stage or anyone who I felt I could ask to have a look at it. And I certainly didn't have the funds to have like an independent editor look at it. But I kind of got it into enough good shape that I could send it off to agents. At that point in Australia, I think there were maybe about 5 or 6 literary agents. And I'm pretty sure 5 of them had their books closed. I think maybe one was open to submissions. And I remember I think that was even Curtis Brown, and they were only open like 2 times a year or something. So I remember sending it off to them. Eventually, 4 months later, getting a rejection letter because it was all done still by post then. Then I was like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to try British agents. And they're a bit more ahead of the game and they were accepting email submissions. So I emailed off to a lot of them and I had quite a few people come back to me and say, I really like this. There's something in it. And then I had one agent who was like the dream agent say, oh, I think this should change and this should change, but I'm going to speak to my colleague and perhaps she'll work with you. I can't take you on because I've got too many authors at the moment. I'm too busy. And then I just had to wait for like another 2-3 months for that agent to come back to me, and they did. And they were like, I'm sorry, I have a similar author. And anyway, it didn't work out. So I just feel like the whole process was just enough to keep me thinking like I'm on the right lines. Perhaps something will happen. So I started writing the second one. Same thing happened. I feel like I got so close with so many agents. I can't remember if I submitted to Australian publishers at the same time because you can do that here quite easily. They have open submission windows. And anyway, by the time I think I got to book 3 and I was still being rejected, but with enough like lovely comments that it kept me going. And I think at that time, if I had my time again, I would have just gone, okay, what's not working? Maybe it's time to just really go and learn the craft of it. And I do remember thinking that I maybe wanted to go and do like a proper writing course, Faber Academy or something similar. But I think I was just freelancing at that stage, and just money-wise, they're so expensive. And it was just, I just felt like I couldn't justify it. I felt like I was already spending way too much time on this, crazy harebrained idea that I might one day be a published author. And I couldn't really justify spending thousands of dollars on a course, which, might help, might not. So I kept on just going myself. But around that time, and I think I was on the book before the Neighbours, and I discovered this whole wonderful literary community. And this was kind of 2019, I think. And I started to make friends with other writers and other aspiring authors. I joined a little online group and met those incredible women who are still fantastic friends now, who read my work and offered advice and feedback, and were just to suddenly have your gang and to meet people like you that you didn't know existed. I think that's the most incredible gift that you can have, especially as an author when you're sitting at home in your room quietly on your own in this like solitary life. So meeting people like that, other authors at different stages, was invaluable. And that I think gave me the real kick to think, okay, let's take this really seriously. I did another rewrite of that book. I sent it out. I did the ASA speed pitching that they do. And at that stage, I think it was maybe COVID. So it was online only. Most terrifying 3-5 minutes of my life pitching to various publishers online. I think I had my crib notes attached around the side of my laptop. And I was trying very hard not to be shown to be looking at what they were. They asked me to send through the full, which I did, but then the rejections trickled in. But one publisher came back to me with some, well, actually not great advice, because she was like, have you considered that maybe crime isn't your genre?
Oh, no.
I was like, oh, shit. Okay. But actually, I think what she really meant was that I wasn't writing, I hadn't quite found my voice yet. And that book was really crimey. And I think my sweet spot is something that's more of a family drama, but with a crime element rather than pure crime, which was what I was trying to achieve. So I do think I absorbed that. And then a friend of mine was like, a friend who's an editor was like, I think you should do this, this, and this, because she had given me some more feedback too. And I just remember saying, I can't look at this book one more time. I hate it. I still hate it now. I can't even look at it I think I've got it saved to my Dropbox or something. And I look at it and I give a small internal shudder. Because when you work on something for so long, you do just you just get sick of the sight of it. Yeah. So, and that's when the idea for the Neighbours started, bubbling away in my brain. And I was like, oh, this shiny new idea. I want to write that instead.
Yeah. Where did the Neighbours inspiration come from? Was it just an idea that popped up into your head, or had you seen something that sparked that?
I think it was a mixture of things, as it always is. It was lockdown, and I was doing a daily walk down to my local Sydney harbourside kind of quite bushy park. And there's a bit where the open parkland moves into a kind of more secluded bush trail. And it's often very, very quiet. And having a big imagination, I'm always just I think as a woman as well, you're always very aware of very quiet areas and just your safety. And I would often go very early in the morning and just feel quite unsafe and unsettled, although I was always thankfully fine. But I just remember thinking this would be a really good place for somebody to be killed. And I think that little germ of an idea sort of found its way in. And then I would always walk past my favourite street in our neighbourhood and look at these beautiful houses that are just so lovely, and just a little, idea of somebody who might live behind those doors and who they might be. And I live quite close to a hospital. So I was like, okay, well, I think he's a doctor. I think he's the one who died or was killed in the park. And then also just the idea of Neighbours. I live in a little townhouse block of, I think there's 9 of us, maybe 10. None of us really know each other. And we see each other all the time, but you kind of sometimes hear what people are up to. So I'm very obsessed with that whole. I'm just nosy, basically. Yeah. So that whole, and then of course the whole premise of the book is you think that your daughter may have had something to do with the murder of your neighbour. And so the jumping off point for that was definitely being a mum of teenage children, and just that kind of point where you have to take a step back and not helicopter them as much and just have faith that they'll be okay. But you're also really invested in them. And you want to know what's going on in their lives, and you can tell when they're lying, and you are just always quite worried, I suppose, So that came from that idea.
Amazing. And so what did the process look like for you? Did you have some more contacts then that when you were querying, it was a little bit easier, or did you just go through the standard process?
It was back to square one. And actually, I think it was harder because by the time I was querying, I think COVID was over and everyone had written a book. There was a glut of people. Yeah, exactly. Everyone had finally had a chance to fulfill their creative urges and write a book, and we're trying to get it out into the world. So I started querying in the UK immediately because, again, there are actually a few more agents with their books open now in Australia. So it's an easier market perhaps to get picked up. But at that point, there still weren't many. And actually, a few had closed their doors, I think, during COVID. So I went out on submission in the UK and quite quickly got picked up by an agent over there, Nikki Lovick. And I just had a Zoom with her, and she's just so lovely. And I just got on with her really well. And she understood exactly where I was coming from, even though it was a Australian set book. she thought it would be picked up by the UK market. But then we went on submission, I think. So it was in the summer 2 years ago. British summer 2 years ago. So that was June 2024. And so began the hell of being on submission, which is just a new kind of agony. Just the constant waiting, the constant refreshing of emails, especially when you're on submission overseas, because then you wake up every morning in Australia and you're checking your emails and you're just like, is this the day? No, it's not.
Yeah.
But we had lots of great feedback from the beginning. That was the good thing about going on submission to publishers. I mean, obviously there are plenty who just never get back to you, but there are, I think because there's personal relationships involved and Nikki's been working in the business for a really long time, people got back to her with feedback. And it was interesting because a lot of the feedback was along the lines of, this is great, but it's very similar in tone to another book we have coming out, or the subject matter is quite similar to the book which just came out. Because, there's only an infinite number of ideas, I guess, and you have to fit into the editor or publisher's list. But then by September, I think, we'd heard that HQ was potentially interested, and then the offer came through. But then it also just took a really long time for that all to eventuate, because things just take 1,000 years in publishing, I'm finding.
Yeah, I have heard that, like many stories. Even when you query, like as you said, like 3-4 months, you could wait.
6 months. In fact, I had a rejection a year on, I think. In fact, I had a rejection from an agent for the Neighbours by the time I'd got the publisher, which was like a year and a half on. So I think they're just inundated. I don't think it's got anything to do with them not working. I think they all work incredibly hard, but they're all working in an industry with way too many books, way too many authors, and not enough agents, not enough publishers. So they just work from, the top of their list. If you get to the top.
I would love to know, actually, how many manuscripts they receive on a weekly basis.
Yeah, hundreds, thousands. I know. I can't even. I mean, even yesterday when HQ did like a little post of all the books that had come out that they'd published in one day. So I guess they pick one day a week. I think there were 10 books on that stack, which is crazy. Yeah, too many books. Too many books.
I know. And you got offered a 2-book deal, which is amazing, right? So did you feel the pressure then? Like you got...
Definitely.
They're going to write second.
The advice that Nikki gave me when we went on submission that June in 2024 was, do something else. Write the second book, renovate your house, paint a wall, get a hobby. And I started writing The Gardens and then stopped, which I don't advise. I just was really paralyzed by not knowing what was going to happen next. I think I probably managed to write about 20,000 words that Australian winter, British summer. And then I did very, very little. But then it all happened so quickly with the Neighbours. I got picked up and signed the contract, I think, end of November. By beginning of December, I'd had the conversation with the publisher. The week in between Christmas and New Year, I did my structural edit. I was told that they were releasing me in June, 6 months later, and July in Australia. So there was so much to do with that book, and copy edits and proofs and all the rest of it. And then also trying to write book 2 at the same time. And I'd given them a synopsis of what book 2 is about. And they were like, yes, that looks great. And in fact, at that point, they were going to be publishing The Gardens 9 months later. I think by the time The Neighbours came out, I was like, I'm going to need more time. And they're like, that's fine. I think they even came to me probably anticipating that and were like, do you need more time? I was like, yes. I think I only finished the first draft of The Gardens 4 months before it was due to be submitted. And obviously you don't want to submit your first draft because that's, nobody should read your first draft except for you. So it was a bit of a madcap process, especially for me because I don't plot. I kind of knew the main beats of the story and I knew what was going to happen and how things would turn out kind of. But I'm very much a writer that takes a bit of time for the ideas to percolate, and I will literally not have a twist or an explanation come to me until the very end. I think, just like with The Neighbours, I changed the ending very, very late, maybe at copy edit stage, I'm not sure. But with The Gardens, I certainly hadn't got the last little twist until I was doing the copy edit, I think, which was only last September, October. And they come to me at the strangest times. I wish I could just sit there with my pen and paper and be like, okay, what are we going to do about this? But they don't. I think that one came to me when I was having a shower. They'll come to me when I'm doing the shopping, cooking, just having a walk. And it's like my brain just needs to be doing something else for the process to work. it's quite inefficient because, I would like to be one of those people who had a spreadsheet right from the beginning and knew exactly what was happening. But I just know now that that's not going to happen. That's just not how my brain works. It's just quite slow.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, inspiration comes from different places and seeing different people, doesn't it?
100%.
So like you said, it probably just sparks something in your mind when you're shopping to be like, oh, that character and this location. So, I mean, you've produced 2 books, which is amazing. I was going to ask you, your books are published in the UK first, then they're coming out on Australia slightly afterwards. How does it feel juggling that in terms of like the readers and being based in Australia? You're very lucky, right? Because some Australian authors, it just comes out in Australia and New Zealand. So yeah, how do you feel having your name spread across 2 different locations? And,
it's very strange. I mean, it's lovely because obviously I'm British, so that's really nice. But yes, it is an odd thing because in my head, although obviously yesterday was lovely and celebratory, it was also a day when I just went to work and celebrated at home with my family, and most of the stuff was happening on social media. Whereas at the end of July, when it's out here, I know that on the first day that it's on shelves, I will go and visit my friend at the bookshop where she works in Crow's Nest at the Constant Reader. And hopefully she'll have put me... Yeah, it's a great shop. And hopefully I'll be on shelves there. And if not, I will have a word to her. Like, you can take me down later, but just, I want to be there for the first day. Yeah, it's different because it's a tangible thing. And although in this day of, I mean, I think in the UK, my book is very much focused on the digital market. And my agent is always absolutely baffled that we spend so much money on books here and that, we will have such a healthy print run, for instance, over here, because in the UK, people just don't buy physical copies of books as much. I mean, obviously with some authors, huge authors, and if you're in supermarkets, people do buy books, but people just read on their Kindle so much more over there. But here, people still love the physical copies, which is so heartening. And the fact that we pay $34 for a book, which is just, I couldn't believe it when I first got here. I couldn't believe how expensive books were. But it's, it's wonderful that people still buy physical books. And there are so many amazing independent book shops around the country and they really thrive. So
I think there's just been like this full circle again, like especially, I mean, I've seen a lot more bookstores open in the UK over the last couple of years, more independent bookstores than chains. But even here now, like in Sydney, there's so many. I mean, you've got the chains, but you've also got a lot of independent as well, which I love. And I'm with you. Like, I love a physical book. I have bought a Kindle recently. I used to have one many, many, many years ago, but I love a physical book, just holding it. And don't know, there's just something about it.
Yeah.
I've got the Kindle just for some of those books I get in advance that they just send to me e-copy, which is absolutely fine. But yeah, and I'm a sucker for a front cover as well. So
same. Yeah. Yeah. That's always amazing. So yeah, I guess it's kind of, and also here because I'm here, I get to meet people and do fun things like have, launch parties and it's a smaller world as well, that especially being in Sydney, I know lots of local authors and we all kind of tend to gather at events and, turn up to support each other. And I don't know if I would have the same thing in the UK because people are just more spread out. And as you know, it's just harder to get around and, it can take you 2 hours to get from one end of London to the other. So it's much harder to turn up to celebrate other people's things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's lovely having both. I do wish I was in the UK. I have not been back. I've only been back to the UK once in 20 years, which is crazy. I know. And this was the year I was like, I'm going to go. In fact, I was thinking about going this June, July, but for various reasons, I couldn't. But yeah, one day.
Yeah. I mean, summertime there at the moment would have been the perfect time to go.
And that's actually why I started writing The Gardens and set it in London, because I started writing it, obviously, as I said, 2 years ago in June 2024. And it was the height of the UK hitting summertime and everybody was uploading pictures on social media of drinking in parks and going to Greece and having amazing northern, hemisphere holidays, and that I just felt very nostalgic for London in summer in particular. So when I sat down to write The Gardens, it was kind of a very nostalgic love letter to London in the summer and also where I grew up in North London. So that was
for anyone listening who haven't been to the UK in summer, I don't know, everyone changes, don't they? I think they just become, it's very, I don't know, everyone's happier. Everyone goes outside, they connect more, they're more sociable. It's just it's beautiful as well. Like the UK in the sun is gorgeous. We just don't see it very often because it's not
I
sunny
think
a long time.
that's definitely why it's a rarity. So that when it happens, it's straight to the park, get your t-shirt off, start sunbathing, get sunburnt.
Oh,
yeah,
so true.
So fun.
Going off topic for 1 minute, I can remember, and I don't know whether you ever saw this advert, but I think it was like Boots advert, Boots the chemist store. It was like there was this advert where the sun came out and there was like everybody grabbing their stuff, like running to the beach, and then the clouds came over 5 minutes later. It was like everyone traipsing back in home with all their stuff. I was like, that is a typical British summer.
Just like, oh yeah, didn't last.
No, exactly. But going back, I mean, before we deep dive quickly into the gardens, I'd love to hear, like, what's one thing that you love about being a writer?
Oh, so many things. But I think the work, like just the writing. I have to say, the one thing I hate about being a writer is the first draft. And I'm in the midst of a first draft for book 3 at the moment. And I loathe it. I hate it. I love the story, but I hate the slog of it. And the kind of like, oh, where's this story going? Come on, let's just get to the end. Because I love the edit. Actually, that's what I love about writing. I love the edit. And I love that in my work as well. You know, like first I get to edit other people's work. I mean, obviously, I don't do many changes because they're people who write for us are professional journalists, so it's normally pretty perfect. But even just, you know, snipping a few lines here and there so it fits the page. And the same thing with writing a book. I find a real joy in kind of developing characters because I don't really feel like I know characters on the first draft, but it's on the second and third that I really get to know them and change them and just slightly tweak, you know, the way they look at someone or a description of something. I love playing around with words like that. And I love kind of brainstorming. I love just sitting down with a big sheet of paper and just doing kind of a bit of a mind map of ideas and see where that takes me. I find that really helpful and I love that. But I think above all else, even before I was a published author, regardless, it was when I found like my little tribe of fellow authors and writers, and that's been the biggest joy. And actually, since getting published and meeting other debut authors, that's been incredible, like sharing the same crazy experiences and
so lovely.
Swapping stories. And that's been so much fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I see you all like attending each other's events, and I think that's so special just to have that network and that support system. And like you said, because writing is very solitary, right? So just having those people that you can reach out to in those moments where, you know, you might be frustrated or having a mind blank of what am I doing or where am I going with this story, just having that support there to kind of keep pushing in the right direction.
And other authors are so generous. Like that's what I was really struck by, especially when you're a debut, being, you know, I had people who I knew and I'd seen around, but I didn't know very well, who reached out to me to sort of check in and ask if I was okay and how I was coping, and which is so lovely because there's a real, you know, it's such a strange world that you're navigating and so unfamiliar, and you don't know if you're doing it right, and no one kind of gives you a guidebook on how it's done. So to have people who've been through that and done it sort of say to you, it's okay if you're feeling, you know, weird about something or if you're worried about something, talk to me, I'm here. And, you know, it is just a crazy world that, you know, you're part of now. So that's been incredible. And people are so generous with just, you know, it's a very awkward stage when you have to reach out to ask people to maybe read your book or to blurb it. But people are so kind and so incredible. And I'm always just really staggered by just the generosity. There's no competition. There's no competition whatsoever. Nice. Everyone just wants to kind of lift each other up and celebrate each other, which is a true joy.
It's so special. So let's talk about the gardens. Do you want to give a synopsis, a brief overview about what the gardens is about? I'm going to do
this is the thing I hate the most. I haven't done it. So So the gardens, it starts with a character called Jess who receives a phone call from a police detective telling her that remains have been found in the shared garden of the house where she grew up. And Jess lives in Australia, and the house where she grows up is back in London, in North London. So she decides in that split second that she's going to go home to London to find out more, because her sister disappeared over 3 decades earlier, and her family never found out what happened to her. And so her instant thought is that this might be her sister, and this might give her answers as to what happened to her. Jess goes back to London with her son, and as the police investigation continues, she sort of has her own investigation as well into what's happening. And some strange things happen when she gets back to London, and some unsettling things. And soon she's sort of swept up in the whole mystery of it. And then in parallel, there's also a B story by an unknown narrator who's talking about growing up in a place called Chiseldown, which is an intentional community or commune deep in the heart of the English countryside. And we don't know how the two stories are related, but we quickly come to suspect that Chiseldown was not just a commune, but was maybe a little bit more like a cult. The two stories kind of come together, and it all goes from there.
Wow.
I need to work on my pitch, obviously.
No,
Not very succinct.
I was listening to that going, this could be adapted into a TV show. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not
I hope so.
Yeah. Then you could do screenwriting.
Yes.
But no, I love those two kind of interlinked, and there's like mystery there as well. And it's obviously family orientated with the siblings. And I love that it's set obviously in the UK, and obviously elements of Australia as well. But I mean, in terms of your characters, I mean, you've got Jess, Nina, the sister, and you've got Ollie, the son. Did they all come to you quite quickly, or were they a work in progress, like you've said previously about like you kind of get a little bit and then as you edit, you add more to their story?
Definitely. I feel like I never really know. I suppose I probably knew the character of Jess the most. She's the protagonist, and she, you know, we're looking at the story through her eyes. I actually wrote her originally in third person and then switched it all to first person on the structural edit. The editor suggested it. I just felt like there was something missing at that stage. And as soon as I switched it to first person, I felt like Jess came alive to me and I knew who she was. And obviously she's not, you know, I think often writers don't write too far away from themselves for those kind of characters. You know, she's a mum in her, I guess, probably late 40s. She grew up in London. You know, there's a lot of parallels to my life, but that's where it ends. But that always helps, I think, if you can kind of step into a character who has some similarities to you. It certainly helps me anyway. But I don't feel as though I know them at all until I start to write the story and how they interact with what happens to them. Ollie was harder because I don't have a son. I have 2 girls. I didn't want it to be too much like the Neighbours, so I wanted it to be a son rather than a daughter. But I did struggle at first because I don't know teenage boys as well. So I had to really, fact check and think about him a bit. And he changed quite a lot over the course of the book. He got younger. There was a whole different storyline that was happening with him, which I decided to take away in the end because I didn't think it was working. But yeah, it's funny how characters just come to you. I don't sit there, and I know some people sort of sit there and do character sketches and like, where did their character, what would their character do in this setting, or would your character eat for breakfast? I don't do any of that. I always think that I should, then I always forget, and I just get to know them in other ways. I sometimes have like little conversations with them in my head, but actually I quite like to step back a bit and look at them as an observer and kind of imagine them, although I can never picture them in my head physically. I can't tell you what they look like particularly. I can give you kind of vague outlines, but
so the story comes first to you and then the characters?
Yeah, I don't even know if the story comes first. I think the setting comes first for me.
Okay.
I'm a real sucker for a sense of place.
Yes.
So for me, it's about the sense of place. Where is this story going to be set? What kind of story am I telling? And then what characters can tell this story? So I think in that order.
Is there anything crazy that you had to Google for this story?
I did have lots of fun researching. Well, first of all, intentional communities or communes, because there are so many around. There are so many. I didn't realize there's a whole world of people living communally still. And I'd always been quite fascinated by that idea. And I'd always been quite fascinated in particular by intentional community that was set up decades ago that is very well respected, sort of academic community. So I think that's where the idea came for it having kind of an academic slant. But then also I was we're all very aware of like online influencers and kind of cultish behavior by those kind of people. And I was really interested in the crossover of how we are drawn in and become like slightly obsessed with these people we see online, kind of cult leaders. And there's quite a thin line, that underneath all, the thing that combines both of them is just this kind of grifter mentality. So I was really interested in the idea of a cult not actually having any particular spiritual ethos, but just basically being a way to manipulate people and also just get their money, which I think is really, bottom line with many of these kind of communities, is to isolate people from families and loved ones and control them financially and emotionally. So yeah, I was really interested in that. So I did a lot of research into cults and also just not your kind of average cults, but kind of the cults next door. Like I've found myself going down whole wormholes of places of, there was a place in London where these poor people had escaped after being held by their quote unquote leader for decades. And they just lived in a regular London house and they'd been kept in prison basically for all these years. I think they'd been allowed to go to the supermarket and things, but they were under his controls so much that they never tried to escape. Yeah. So I was very intrigued by this whole idea of how people fall into these dark worlds and get sucked into them, but also just the motivations of the people behind them. So, yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because I feel like there's so much about this world that we don't know. And then, like you said, digging it, I mean, there's a bit more, they're starting to showcase a little bit more now, aren't they, in TV and and you're like, wow, okay. And you do think about the people that are part of these cults, like how did they get there? Like something in their life must have happened for them to want to just feel a part of something. And
absolutely.
Then you have those leaders who, can be very, let's say, brainwashing, but it's crazy, isn't it? And you do really feel for them. So I can imagine that was very intriguing.
It was, But I definitely didn't want it to be just like a cult book. And I would say that it's more about coercion and manipulation and also just the aftermath. It's very much a story about what happens after, someone maybe has had contact with these kind of communities and years later, what's left and also the children of, these communities. That's what I really explore in the book, is kind of what happens to the kids who grow up in these worlds and how do they leave and what do they do next. And I listened and read a lot about it. And, there's some really, really awful, sad stories about what happens to people after they've been in these kind of places. But there are also incredible stories of triumph and amid all the damage. So kind of bringing all those elements together was a lot, but I hope it works.
Ah, exciting. And so it comes out on the 28th of July in Australia.
It does.
Yay. And you've obviously got some events set up, correct?
I do. I have, my launch is, I think, on the 5th of August in Harry Hartog Mossman. Yeah. And then I've got another event, Dimmock's Books in Bars, with a couple of other crime writers, Danica McKenzie and Petrina McGovern, which is really exciting. I think that's mid-August. Have a look on my socials and I'll be organised and have them up there.
So where can people find you? Your tag is just Emma Babbington, is that correct?
It is. Yes, that's right. Or Emma Babbington author on Facebook, but I'm not as good on that. I'm more on Instagram.
And I know you've got a link on Instagram as well, so you can click on that link and then it's got, you can read snippets of your books and audios and you can go to the website. So it's kind of like one place. Well, look, I have loved chatting to you and hearing your story. It's fascinating. And I'm so happy that you finally got your publishing deal, because it just shows, true determination and grit that you've put into this. And it's very well deserved. And I'm excited for everyone to read your book, The Gardens, when it comes out in Australia. And I can't wait to see the reviews from the UK, because I know the UK readers are going to love it, because it's right up our alley. And then to see more about your third book that you're writing. So no pressure.
If I ever finish that first draft. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
We're wishing you all the best,
lots of fun.
Emma.
Thank you.